welcome back to the most professional sports channel on YouTube. Welcome back to Swivel Chair Sports. I'm your host, Zach Cirkmark-Brittle. Here goes today, Aaron. Go and say hi, Aaron.
Hi, if you like our content, be sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment and let us know what you think.
And thank you for watching. Other than that, let's go ahead and get into it. So in this video, we'll be continuing our NFL offseason grading series. If you haven't seen our other offseason grading videos, make sure to check those out right after this one. So far, we've given out grades to the teams of the NFC West, AFC West, NFC North, but in this video, we'll be taking a look at the AFC North, consisting of the Bengals, Browns, Ravens, and Steelers. Starting off first with the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals last season suffered through the injury of Joe Burrow a little over halfway through the season, but Jake Browning stepped in, almost helped lead the Bengals to the playoffs, falling just short as they finished as the only AFC North team to miss out on the postseason last year. Heading into this offseason, there were questions surrounding T. Higgins and whether or not he would be in Cincinnati come the start of 2024. They did lose a few key pieces, including veteran defensive lineman DJ Reader, who signed with the Detroit Lions this offseason to pair alongside Aiden Hutchinson, while offensive tackle Jonah Williams went down to Arizona to protect Kyler Murray, and Joe Mixon was traded to the Houston Texans in order to clear up some cap space for any extensions in the foreseeable future. As far as additions go, the Bengals did bring in Zach Moss, who looked great early last season, filling in for an absent Jonathan Taylor in Indianapolis, before Taylor returned and took back over the lead back duties for the Colts, as well as signing Geno Stone away from the rival Baltimore Ravens to hopefully strengthen that secondary while also hurting a division rival in the process. They also brought in Trent Brown, offensive tackle from New England, to go opposite of left tackle Orlando Brown and replace some of the production lost by watching Jonah Williams walk out the door. Then moving into the draft, in the first round, taking Amarius Mims, 18th overall, to further improve an offensive line that desperately needs to do a better job protecting Joe Burrow, with him getting injured just every single year of his career. After that, they took a fair amount of defense, scooping up a couple of defensive linemen to help replace DJ Reader and Chris Jenkins out of Michigan in the second round, and McKinley Jackson out of Texas A&M in the third round, along with wide receiver out of Alabama Jermaine Burton, who they also took in the third round as a potential insurance for T. Higgins down the line, but as well as a replacement for Tyler Boyd this upcoming season. So Aaron, with all that being said, what's your opinion of the Cincinnati Bengals offseason?
Well, on the offensive side of the ball, they've got all the skill position players they need. I mean, you said they lost Joe Mixon, but they bring in Zach Moss,
Right.
Who could arguably, be the same, if not a little bit better, for them in their offense. So they just needed to kind of shore up that offensive line, and they definitely looked to do that. I really like that Amarius Mims pick, one of the best raw talent offensive linemen coming out in this draft.
Yeah, and he's got some time to develop behind Orlando and Trent Brown. So I think that was a good selection by them, getting a guy with maybe a higher ceiling, but it's not quite ready to start right away. And then I love the replacements at the D tackle position with Chris Jenkins and McKinley Jackson. I think those are both great selections, considering you watched DJ Reader leave this offseason. So I think as far as replacing the talent they lost, they did a pretty good job of that. And then, as you said, Zach Moss for Joe Mixon. So given, their ability to replace most of those positions they lost this offseason, I think they did about as good as you could have hoped for them. Granted, it's probably not in the A range, but I'd give them a solid B for their performance this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, not a whole lot of super flashy moves, but they didn't really need to. They had kind of their core group of players that they were bringing back, so filled in some holes that they had. Yeah, I think probably B+.
Yeah, I think given, really the big question for them is just keeping Joe Burrow healthy. If they can keep Joe Burrow healthy, they're a contender. So, like I said, replace Tyler Boyd to a degree, and then replace DJ Reader to a degree as well. I think they did pretty well. All right, moving on to the Cleveland Browns. The Browns last season enjoyed quite the odd year. Last year, Nick Chubb went down with a gruesome leg injury early in the season, and then Deshaun Watson was in and out of the lineup throughout the year like he has been throughout his stint in Cleveland. Eventually, after Deshaun Watson was knocked out for the year, Cleveland was forced to look towards an old division rival in Joe Flacco to come in and save the day, leading the Browns, who was largely carried by their incredible defense all season, to the playoffs. Against all odds, they did end up getting dismantled at the hands of the young, hungry Houston Texans, but all things considered, pretty decent year for Cleveland. The Browns went into this offseason looking to improve a lackluster offense that has been mired in injuries the last few seasons, but did suffer through a few notable losses as well, watching both linebackers Anthony Walker and Sion Takitaki walk out the door as Walker signed with the Miami Dolphins and Takitaki went up to New England, along with the Browns also letting Joe Flacco leave in hopes that Deshaun Watson can remain healthy and still has enough left in the tank. As far as additions go, the Browns were able to swing a trade to bring in another target for Deshaun Watson to throw to in Jerry Jeudy from the Broncos, who looks to turn his career around after somewhat of a disappointing start in Denver. The Browns also brought in linebackers Jordan Hicks from Minnesota and Devin Bush from Seattle to replace, if not improve upon, that production lost in watching Anthony Walker and Takitaki walk out the door. They also signed the eater of W's himself, Jameis Winston, to back up and, more likely than not, fill in for Deshaun Watson, who has yet to play a full season since arriving in Cleveland. As far as the draft goes, the Browns did not have their first-round pick, thanks to the Deshaun Watson trade, so they didn't make their first selection until pick 54, where they selected defensive lineman Michael Hall Jr. out of Ohio State to hopefully draw some attention away from Myles Garrett and Zadarius Smith on passing downs, but with only 5 picks after that, they weren't able to add much in terms of immediate impact players, taking Michigan guard Zach Zinter in the 3rd round, who's coming off a nasty leg injury that he suffered in Michigan's final regular season game that ended up keeping him out of pre-draft workouts, as well as also drafting wide receiver Jamari Thrash out of Louisville in the 5th round, who could be a sneaky pick for them given if he's given the opportunities to grow at the NFL level. But Aaron, what do you think of the Browns and what they've been able to accomplish this offseason given their, cap and draft limitations?
Every once in a while you're scrolling through your phone and then we start preparing for these videos. And off the top of my head, I'm like, man, Cleveland didn't really do a whole lot. But then you remember they brought in Jerry Jeudy with the trade with Denver. So Amari Cooper is no longer alone out there on the outside.
Right.
They're going to be getting Nick Chubb back. That's obviously big. So I think they did a little bit more than some people realize, especially me. And then some other things, they focused, shocker, AFC North team focuses heavily on defense during the draft and free agency. So I think they probably could have went somewhere else, but I mean this is textbook AFC North, going D tackles, linebackers, DBs. So I'm not surprised. I do like some of their picks. You said Michael Hall. I really like that pick, but I mean it's just kind of par for the course for AFC North.
Yeah, and their defense was already pretty stacked. I mean, like I mentioned, it's basically the whole reason they even made the playoffs last year, along with Joe Flacco having a little bit of a career resurgence there at the second half of the season. But as far as like improving the offensive side, I do think some of these moves may go a little under the radar. The Jamari Thrash pick, I think he could develop into something special behind Cooper and now Jeudy, with him being the 3rd target in that offense, maybe even 4th. I think he could grow into a pretty solid NFL talent. And then Zach Zinter, assuming that he can get healthy, he's a really solid guard up there in the front. So you got to assume they were hoping to, try to maybe protect Deshaun Watson down the line, avoid some of these injuries that he's been having to go through his first 2 years in Cleveland. But yeah, all things considered, they didn't have, a whole lot of cap flexibility this offseason, and then obviously no draft picks really. So I think they did okay, all things considered. I'd probably give them a C+, borderline B-, but I think I'm going to go C+ just because, I think they could have improved the offense maybe a little bit more than they did. What do you think?
I would have loved to see another wide receiver somewhere along the board, whether it's free agency or draft. But they did bring in Naheem Hines, who was a real
True.
dynamic
That's a good
player
one.
with Indy. Didn't really do a whole lot with Buffalo thanks to some injuries, I believe. So it'll be interesting to see how he looks this year and if he can kind of shake off the rust and have a real impact for that team. But with that being said, yeah, I'd probably lean B-.
Yeah. And if Nick Chubb can come back this year, which I don't know if he'll be ready by, the start of the season, but if Nick Chubb can come back this year, that could be, the difference in that offense, that I'm looking for. I kind of forgot to factor that in because he did miss such a large portion of the season last year. But yeah, right on the line of B- for me. It'll be interesting to see how that Nick Chubb injury, progresses. So. Okay, moving on into the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens enjoyed an amazing season last year, clinching the 1 seed in the AFC and making it all the way to the AFC Championship game, where they ran into the defending champion Kansas City Chiefs and were unable to get over that hump. Looking to build off a Lamar Jackson MVP run, the Ravens made one of the biggest splashes of the 2024 offseason. But before we get into that, let's look at the pieces they lost. Starting off with linebacker Patrick Queen, who signed over with the hated rival Pittsburgh Steelers and looks to add to what is already a stacked Steeler defense. The Ravens also lost safety Geno Stone to another division rival in the Cincinnati Bengals, where Stone can bring an extra edge to a needy Bengals secondary. Also on the defensive side of the football, the Ravens watched Jadeveon Clowney leave and sign with the Carolina Panthers. And along with all those defensive losses, Baltimore also watched 3 key linemen all walk out the door, losing tackle Morgan Moses to the Jets, as well as guard John Simpson, who joins him in New York. And possibly the most notable loss on the offensive line, guard Kevin Zeitler left and signed with the Detroit Lions. So suffice it to say, the Ravens lost a lot of talent in the front of that offense that was responsible for helping protect MVP Lamar Jackson. As far as additions go for the Baltimore Ravens this offseason, they, of course, signed arguably the biggest offensive name in free agency, Derrick Henry, to a multi-year deal to pair alongside Lamar Jackson and create quite possibly the most impressive and terrifying read option combination in NFL history. They were also able to retain star defensive lineman Justin Matabuke, who we both thought may have been on his way out the door. However, when it came to replacing the offensive line talent that they watched walk out the door this year, they didn't really address that in free agency. And moving on to the draft, the Ravens used their first-round pick to take cornerback Nate Wiggins out of Clemson, 30th overall, who should pair beautifully across from Marlon Humphrey in the secondary, as well as taking another corner in TJ Tampa out of Iowa State in the 4th round, who could develop into a solid starting NFL corner too. Baltimore also took another weapon for Lamar to throw to in Devontae Walker, wide receiver out of North Carolina, who could thrive alongside Zay Flowers and Mark Andrews. The Ravens did draft tackle Roger Rosengarten out of Washington with their 2nd round pick, but other than him and 7th round center Nick Samick from Michigan State, Baltimore still neglected to replace the lost offensive line production. So, Aaron, what are your thoughts on the Ravens' splishy, splashy offseason?
Well, they also lost Pro Bowler Tyler Huntley to
Of course,
Browns,
yes, I forgot.
so
Yes, notable Pro Bowler
that really
Tyler
hurts.
Huntley. Yes,
He played obviously a decent amount that year that Lamar had that knee issue. So losing your proven backup quarterback, that does hurt with all jokes aside. But yeah, kind of Derrick Henry being their biggest splash name in free agency. That's good, but there wasn't really a whole lot else.
yeah,
So that sucks. But I do kind of like the draft actually. Devontae Walker.
I did like that.
I like that pick. I don't think a lot of people really saw his true potential because the NCAA is stupid and was slow on repealing their suspension of him last year. So, but obviously he went to a good place. And then Roger Rosengarten out of Washington, I really like that pick. I think he'll develop into a really solid player there.
Yeah, I think TJ Tampa was a really good value pick. Already having a pretty good secondary with Marlon Humphrey and Kyle Hamilton. So being able to add talents like TJ Tampa and Nate Wiggins alongside those two, I think's really good. So as far as their draft goes, I think they knocked it out of the park. Like you said, I really like what they did in the draft as far as that's concerned. Free agency, I think, could have
other than Devin Leary. Not a big fan of that pick, I will say.
Yeah, well, they can't all be winners, but I think their draft was really, really good. I think their free agency outside of, like you said, outside of Derrick Henry, didn't really do a whole lot, and they lost a whole lot of offensive line production that I think could end up coming back to bite them. Of course, when you got Lamar Jackson, a quarterback, you could probably afford to have a little bit of a weak offensive line because he can evade a pressure better than most quarterbacks can, and then Derrick Henry, of course, can run through just about anybody. So I wish they would have done more for their offensive line, and because of that, I'm probably gonna give them a B minus because the Derrick Henry pickup was great, but they lost a lot of offensive line talent.
I would just one season love to see Lamar Jackson with, two all-pro receivers and a solid tight end and just see what he can do. Because I don't think he's really gotten to do that. So once again, I am disappointed that the Ravens seemingly are doing what the Packers did with Aaron Rodgers and just, here's a weapon here and there, but not like fully loading up and believing that their guy can take them all the way. And kind of leaning on that defense, which in that division, fair. That's what they do. Defense. But yeah, I'd probably be right around the C+ range.
Yeah, the Derrick Henry pickup's the only thing putting me outside the C's because, like I said, I really wish they would have replaced some of that offensive line talent. Those are three really good linemen that you're watching walk out the door, and bringing in one guy who's a rookie and Roger Rosengarten to replace those guys is you got to do more than that. So, finally moving on to our last team, the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers last season snuck into the playoffs as a 7 seed for, I think, the second time since the expanded playoff format, riding the wave of a staunch defense that carried a Pittsburgh team whose offense could never get it going, and this offseason they were looking to change that. Starting off with the notable losses, obviously parting ways with starting quarterback Kenny Pickett, shipping him down to Philadelphia to back up Jalen Hurts, and honestly just wanted to clean out that QB room altogether because it was a nightmare. Letting go of Mason Rudolph and Mitch Trubisky as well to completely clear out that QB room, and whatever curse has been hanging over them since Big Ben had Tommy John surgery, hoping that would finally be eradicated. The Steelers also decided it was time to move on from veteran receiver Deontay Johnson, sending him down to Carolina, where he can rot away in obscurity just like Adam Thielen has. As far as notable additions go, well, you know how I said the Steelers were looking to eradicate whatever curse they had over their QB room? Well, they chose to bring in an entirely separate, but quite possibly just as deadly curse in Russell Wilson, who they thankfully will not be paying hundreds of millions of dollars to. And that makes this a pretty decent move, all things considered, especially when you factor in trading for Justin Fields this offseason and having him sit behind Russ, pressuring him to hopefully perform better than he did during his short stint in Denver. But that's not all, because just when you thought the Steelers were focusing on improving the offense this offseason and leaving their already stacked defense alone, they chose to add yet another Pro Bowler to the defense in linebacker Patrick Queen, signing him away from rival Baltimore Ravens. So while they made themselves better, they also made their most hated rival worse. Win-win, if you ask me. Now digging into the draft, the Steelers had a pretty solid one to say the least, taking tackle Troy Fautanu out of Washington, who was considered one of the better offensive line talents in the draft this year. He can improve an underperforming Pittsburgh O-line alongside second-round picks center Zach Frazier out of West Virginia, who many considered to be a top interior offensive lineman this year, not far behind the likes of Jackson Powers Johnson and Graham Barton. And then taking Michigan receiver Roman Wilson in the 3rd round to replace some of the production they're losing by watching Deontay Johnson walk out the door. Hopefully he can be a true number 2 to George Pickens, as well as a linebacker Peyton Wilson out of NC State in the 3rd round as well, who is largely considered to be one of, if not the best linebacker prospect this year, and should be able to learn a lot by playing alongside a guy like Patrick Queen. So what do you think about the Steelers offseason this year, Aaron?
Well, I think they definitely did the right thing in trying to solve their quarterback problem. Kenny Pickett just wasn't quite getting the job done, and you couldn't just keep riding around with, who they already had there. It just wasn't working. They tried that for several years. So just fully moving on and going and getting Russell Wilson, who you seemingly know who you're going to get now. Didn't necessarily have a bad season last year. Just his play style doesn't really mesh with Sean Payton's offense, I think. So Sean Payton went and got his quarterback, and now they are paying for the Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback. Thanks, Denver. As a Chiefs fan, I appreciate that. And then also going and getting who could be a really decent, I think, starting quarterback if he continues to develop a little bit. Justin Fields from Chicago, who was looking to kind of offload him to make way for Caleb Williams. So good moves there for the quarterback position. Bringing in Van Jefferson, who had a decent few years there with the Rams. So kind of replacing Deontay Johnson there. And then in the draft, love the Fatanu pick. Love the Frazier pick. Line has not been good these last few years, so really dedicating to kind of your weakest spot here. I think they're really showing that they're trying to improve this offseason.
Yeah, I think the Steelers definitely took a big step in the right direction, like you said. Clearing out that quarterback room was, I don't know about long overdue, but I think last year, before this past season, you could even kind of feel like they probably were ready to move on from Pickett. So getting that opportunity
last year, you could feel it was like, all right, this is same old, same old.
Yeah. So getting the opportunity to move on from Pickett, all jokes aside, I do think the Russell Wilson situation is really, really good for Pittsburgh because of the contract being, basically nothing. Getting to bring in a Super Bowl winning quarterback, Pro Bowl talent like Russell Wilson to, at the very, very least, mentor a guy like Justin Fields, who you may not be, committed to long term, at least seemingly not, because I don't think they're willing to offer him an extension, but probably rightfully so. You haven't seen him in your system yet. You haven't seen what he's capable of for you guys yet. So I think it'll be interesting to see what their plans are at quarterback this next year. Justin Fields could be the starting QB by the end of the season, for all we know. But all things considered, I do think the Steelers really, really did improve their roster. So I think I'm going to give them a B+, because I really like their draft. And then as far as free agency goes, Patrick Queen, adding him to that defense is terrifying. And then, just completely changing the QB room is a huge plus as well. So
yeah, I'm leaning towards A-. Another player that I forgot to mention, Roman Wilson, wide receiver out of Michigan. Really, I think kind of underrated guy in this draft. I think he could really develop into someone with some special hands and be a real difference maker there for Pittsburgh. So I'd lean A-.
Yeah, I was right on the line of saying A-. I think the only reason I don't is because, it's still a question mark whether or not you improved at QB. We're pretty sure you did, but we have to see it first. So.
Well, anything other than what they had, because
That's
now
fair.
they're trying.
That's fair. Yes, they're at least trying. They're not going to just, hand the ball off and hope to win 20-12. So, but yeah, I think this division is going to be a competitive division, just like it always is. Ravens, some could argue, took a little bit of a step back. Bengals are going to be right there again. Ravens are still going to be right there, of course. I mean, you got Derrick Henry, so you could easily say they took a step forward. Browns, I think if Deshaun Watson can stay healthy and play at least somewhat up to his potential, then, they're going to be feisty. And then you got the Steelers, who, if Russell Wilson can turn back the clock, they're going to be right there in the mix as well. So, unless you got anything else, Aaron, I think that'll do it. For this episode of the most unprofessional sports channel on YouTube, Swivel Chair Sports, I've been your host, Zach Zuckerberg Purple, here with the ghost today, Aaron. Go and say bye, Aaron.
Bye.
All right. Please make sure to go check out our other off-season grading videos if you haven't already. Make sure to like and subscribe if you made it this far. But other than that, have a good day and deuces.